I had just finished watering the roses in the backyard when I heard the sharp crack of my son's bedroom door slamming. My heart sank before I even saw her, my daughter-in-law Emily, standing there with a smirk that froze me in place. "You won't believe what I just did," she said, tossing a thick envelope onto the bed where my son, Ryan, sat in stunned silence. The words barely registered before my mind caught up. She was divorcing him. Not because of any fight or unhappiness. No, this was calculated, premeditated, and cruel. Her greedy eyes were locked on one thing: my $1 million trust fund. Decades of sacrifice flashed through my mind. I had built everything carefully, from my small business to the properties, savings, and investments, all meant to provide security for Ryan, his children, and the family legacy. I had poured love, trust, and guidance into my son's life, even bending over backward to support their marriage in its early years. And now, in one heartless act, Emily was attempting to steal her way into a fortune that wasn't hers, leaving a man she promised to love humiliated and heartbroken. I stepped into the room, hands trembling slightly, forcing my voice to stay calm. "Emily," I said, though it sounded more like a warning, "you're making a huge mistake." She laughed, a sharp, bitter sound that sliced through the room. "I'm not making a mistake," she said, her eyes glinting with greed. "I've calculated every angle. I divorce him, I claim half of whatever he has access to, and then I'll be living comfortably. You can't stop me, and honestly, why would you want to?" The audacity, the sheer gall of her words, left me momentarily speechless. For all the family dinners, holiday visits, and moments where I had tried to extend trust, she had been plotting this betrayal silently, weaving her scheme with the precision of someone who thought they were untouchable. My son, Ryan, looked like he had been physically drained. His face was pale, his hands shaking, and he muttered, "Mom, she can't do this, can she?" I swallowed hard, knowing that legally she could try, but what I also knew was that I would not allow her to succeed without consequences. I closed the door gently behind me, my mind racing. I needed to think carefully. A rushed response could play into her hands. But even in the first moments of shock, a cold spark of determination ignited in me. Betrayal of this magnitude couldn't go unanswered. The woman who thought she could waltz into my family's wealth and destroy our bonds would learn very quickly that I had a lifetime of patience, cunning, and resilience at my disposal. The first step was understanding the scope of her plan. Emily had already begun, subtly and maliciously, isolating Ryan from friends and advisors who could guide him. She had planted seeds of doubt, insinuating that my trust fund was hers by right, that my son could survive without me intervening. She was audacious, yes, but also careless. She underestimated the vigilance and careful preparation of someone who had worked her entire life to protect what was rightfully hers and her family's. That afternoon, I called my attorney, a seasoned woman named Karen who had worked with me for over a decade. She understood the intricacies of trusts and estates better than anyone else I knew, and she didn't flinch at complicated legal battles. "Karen," I said, voice tight with both anger and urgency, "Emily is trying to steal her way into my trust fund. She's divorcing Ryan strategically, hoping to get part of my $1 million trust. I need to protect everything and make sure she never succeeds." Karen's voice was calm but alert, the tone of someone who had faced deception and greed many times before. "We'll need documentation, financial audits, and to tighten the terms of your trust immediately. She's greedy, and she's reckless. But you have the advantage. This is your money, structured properly. She can't touch it without a fight." I spent the rest of the evening gathering documents. Years of meticulous accounting, property deeds, investment statements, and legal correspondences were laid out across my living room table. My son's eyes, still haunted by shock, flicked over the papers. "Mom, I don't even know where to start." I gave him a reassuring, yet fierce look. "Start by trusting me, Ryan. You're not losing a thing. Not while I'm alive." The spark of hope in his eyes reminded me why this fight was personal. It wasn't just money, it was his dignity, his marriage, and our family's integrity. That night, I drafted the first of many letters to Emily, careful to remain factual yet firm. "You may think you can manipulate the law to gain access to my trust fund," I wrote, "but my assets are protected, and your greed will not succeed. I suggest reconsidering your choices before it's too late." I paused before sending, the words heavy but precise, knowing this was the first step in turning the tide. By morning, I had scheduled meetings with financial auditors and estate lawyers, creating layers of protection, anticipating every loophole she might attempt to exploit. I felt a strange sense of calm amid the storm. Shock had given way to strategy. Every betrayal carries a trail, every scheme has weaknesses, and Emily's arrogance made her blind to the consequences she was about to face. Late that afternoon, Ryan came to me quietly. "Mom, I can't believe she would do this. She smiled at me yesterday like nothing was wrong, and now she's filing papers as if she owned everything." I held his hand firmly. "Ryan, that's how greed works, it blinds people. But we won't let it blind us. Watch and learn carefully. Sometimes, the most satisfying victories come from patience and precision." The day ended with Emily sending a formal notice of divorce via courier. The envelope, thick and imposing, sat on the counter like a challenge. I stared at it for a long moment, my reflection in the polished surface of the table steady and unwavering. This was not the end. It was only the beginning. I knew I had to prepare for her next move. Emily would try to manipulate lawyers, sway friends, and create public sympathy. But every time she made a move, I would be ready. She underestimated me, assumed my age or experience would make me passive, but she didn't know how deeply I valued family, loyalty, and justice. Every betrayal has a cost, and she was about to learn hers. The first seeds of her downfall were already planted in my mind, tightening the trust legally, documenting her manipulations, gathering witnesses, and ensuring that Ryan had the emotional and legal support he needed. And as I looked at that thick envelope once more, I whispered a quiet warning, both to her and to the universe: she thinks she's clever. She hasn't seen anything yet. The moment she overreaches, her empire of lies will collapse, and I will be there to witness it. If you've ever been betrayed by someone you trusted, you know the sharp sting of disbelief, the anger, and the heartbreak. But there is power in strategy, patience, and unwavering resolve. And in my case, revenge wasn't just a promise, it was inevitable. Watch carefully as a greedy betrayal unravels, and justice finds its way in the most unexpected and satisfying ways. The moment Emily filed the divorce papers, I felt a surge of anger that threatened to overwhelm me. But I didn't act impulsively. I knew that a rash move could backfire, and this woman thrived on recklessness. I needed strategy. I spent that morning poring over the legal documents with my attorney Karen, carefully marking every clause, every potential loophole she might exploit. Emily had assumed she could waltz into my $1 million trust, but she had underestimated the meticulous protections I had placed over the years. My lifetime of experience in business and careful estate planning now became my weapon. I glanced at Ryan, my son, sitting quietly beside me. His face was pale, his eyes downcast. "Mom," he whispered, she's really trying to take it all." I reached out, resting my hand over his. "Ryan, you're not losing a thing. Greed blinds people, and she's about to find out exactly how dangerous that can be." His shoulders relaxed slightly, but the shadow of betrayal lingered. I could see it in his eyes, the trust he had once placed in her now replaced by confusion and hurt. Karen suggested we act quickly. Emily had already begun whispering lies to friends and distant relatives, subtly insinuating that my wealth was hers by right. She had hoped to sway opinion before I could even react. But I had allies of my own, lawyers, financial auditors, and trusted family friends who could verify the integrity of my trust. I began assembling a team that could track every move Emily made, documenting her attempts to manipulate the law and public perception. By afternoon, I was coordinating a meeting with a forensic accountant. My silver hair tied back neatly in a low bun, beige cardigan over a floral blouse, I moved with calm authority, though my heart pounded with anticipation. The accountant, a meticulous man in his late 60s with gray combed-back hair, spread spreadsheets across the table. "Emily is looking for gaps," he said. "We'll make sure she finds none." I nodded, scanning the numbers myself, already envisioning how each documented transaction and legal safeguard could be used to trap her lies. Meanwhile, I began quietly speaking with other family members, carefully framing the situation without revealing too much. Emily thrived on creating doubt, turning relatives into silent allies. But I had decades of understanding family dynamics on my side. I whispered facts to cousins, nieces, and longtime friends, emphasizing transparency and integrity. Slowly, I could feel her narrative unraveling before it even gained traction. The next day, I received a call from my estate attorney. "She's trying to move assets quickly," Karen said, voice calm but firm. "Liquid accounts, joint holdings. She wants to create the illusion she has control before we can legally stop her. We need to act immediately. I clenched my fists, but I didn't raise my voice. Calmness was a weapon. Do what's necessary, I replied. She may think she's clever, but she hasn't met me yet. I spent the following hours personally reviewing each property deed, investment statement, and legal clause. Every small error, every poorly worded agreement from years past was analyzed and corrected. Emily's plan depended on sloppy paperwork or overlooked loopholes. I refused to give her that opportunity. While working, I reflected on how betrayal always carries arrogance. She thought she could outwit me because I'm older, that age would make me passive. She had misjudged me entirely. Then came the next insult. Emily had hired a private attorney who contacted our financial advisors, hinting at lawsuits that didn't exist yet. She wanted to intimidate us, hoping fear would make Ryan panic and concede. I leaned back in my chair, silver hair brushing my shoulders, and let out a controlled breath. Fear was her tool, but patience and preparation were mine. I called my advisors personally, walked them through her false claims, and fortified each position legally. Every intimidation tactic she threw was met with detailed counters and evidence, leaving her exposed. But it wasn't just legal strategy one had to consider. Emily had begun spreading rumors, telling neighbors and mutual friends that my son was unfit, that the family trust was hers by right. I knew I had to act socially as well as legally. I began crafting messages to friends and associates, framing the truth without attacking Emily directly. Let the facts speak. Every lie she spread was countered with quiet, undeniable evidence. One evening, as I reviewed emails and phone records, I realized she had already taken small steps to drain joint accounts that Ryan had access to. My pulse quickened, but I maintained composure. I immediately contacted the banks, freezing transfers and flagging suspicious activity. Her arrogance was her weakness. She assumed no one would notice until it was too late. She hadn't accounted for a lifetime of vigilance. Ryan sat beside me during all of this, pale but gradually regaining some of his confidence. "Mom, how do you stay so calm?" he asked, voice shaky. I smiled faintly, brushing a strand of silver hair from my forehead. "Experience, Ryan. And the knowledge that greed always carries a trail. She may be bold, but boldness without foresight is her downfall." By the third day, I had begun collecting hard evidence of her manipulations, emails, receipts, bank statements, and witness accounts from friends she had tried to sway. My living room became a command center, papers stacked high, spreadsheets spread across every surface. I could see her patterns forming, every move intended to intimidate, to manipulate, to position herself as a victim while she tried to claim what wasn't hers. Every single action was meticulously documented, creating an airtight case. It was during one late-night session, silver hair tied back, cardigan draped over my shoulders, sitting under the warm glow of a desk lamp, that I realized the emotional impact on Ryan had shifted. He was no longer paralyzed by shock. He was learning to stand firm, inspired by my determination. "Mom, I never knew I could feel so strong in the face of betrayal," he whispered. I reached out, holding his hand. "Strength isn't born overnight, Ryan. It comes from knowing who you are, what you've built, and that some people's greed isn't stronger than decades of work and love." Emily made her first direct move toward court proceedings the following morning, sending papers that implied I had tried to hide assets. My heart raced, but I had anticipated this. I meticulously prepared a response, including notarized statements, audit proofs, and financial records that left no room for misrepresentation. Every document reinforced the same truth: the trust was protected, Ryan had nothing to concede, and her attempt to manipulate the law would fail. Then came the subtle psychological warfare: emails from Emily intended to provoke fear, social media posts to sway opinion. I didn't reply publicly. Instead, I documented everything. Her own attempts to manipulate public perception were now becoming evidence against her. Each message, each attempt at intimidation, strengthened our position. Her arrogance was building the case that would ultimately ensure her ruin. By the end of Part 2, I had mapped out a complete strategy: legal fortification, social influence, psychological counters, and direct evidence gathering. Emily thought she could exploit weakness. Instead, she was walking directly into a trap of her own making. She underestimated a lifetime of experience, vigilance, and relentless patience. As I leaned back in my chair that evening, silver hair loose around my shoulders, beige cardigan slightly unbuttoned. I whispered to myself, she thinks she's winning, but every step she takes is leading her closer to defeat. And when the time comes, she will wish she had never underestimated me. I looked out the window at the fading sunlight and felt a sense of calm satisfaction. The first wave of her attack had been countered, and now the real battle, the exposure, the confrontation, the ultimate justice, was only beginning. The audience is left on edge, knowing the grandmother is fully in control. Emily is growing bolder and reckless, and the next part promises a meticulous, cunning counterattack that will escalate the drama. The morning sunlight filtered through the lace curtains of my study as I sat at the heavy oak desk, silver hair tied neatly in a low bun, beige cardigan draped over a floral blouse, hands clasped over a stack of papers. Every document represented decades of careful planning, investments, property deeds, contracts, and most importantly, the terms of my $1 million trust. Emily believed she had the upper hand, thinking I was too old or too sentimental to act decisively. She had misjudged me entirely. Every betrayal carries a trail, and I intended to follow hers to the letter. I began by reviewing the patterns of her deception. Emails, financial statements, even casual comments to friends, each one could be turned into evidence. Emily had made a crucial mistake. She assumed speed and audacity would blind me. But in that quiet morning, as I sipped tea and methodically analyzed every angle, I realized the truth. She was reckless, arrogant, and above all, predictable. Every one of her moves could be anticipated, and every lie documented. By mid-morning, I had begun compiling a comprehensive timeline of Emily's manipulations. I laid out spreadsheets, organized emails by date and content, and annotated phone records. I worked carefully, my brow furrowed, lips pressed in concentration. This was more than paperwork, it was a blueprint for justice. Each entry, each note, became a tool. I could almost see her smug face as she believed she was untouchable, and it fueled a cold, precise determination within me. Ryan sat across from me, watching the process with a mixture of awe and lingering despair. "Mom, how do you keep so calm?" he asked, voice soft. I glanced up, silver hair brushing my shoulders, eyes steady and piercing. Experience, Ryan. And the understanding that people like her leave traces everywhere. We just need to read them carefully. I could see a flicker of hope returning in his eyes, the first hint of the courage she had tried to steal from him. Next, I began orchestrating subtle checks and traps. I contacted financial institutions, ensuring no sudden transfers could occur. I arranged for forensic audits of all accounts she had tried to influence. I met quietly with longtime business associates, framing the situation without disclosing too much, ensuring they remained vigilant for any attempts to manipulate or misrepresent facts. Every ally I recruited became a shield against her greed. Emily, unaware of the layers I had constructed, moved boldly. She sent messages to friends of the family, attempting to cast doubt on Ryan's capability to manage the trust. She whispered insinuations that I was being unfair or overprotective. But I documented everything. Each message, each whispered claim, became a nail in the coffin of her arrogance. Greed always carries a signature, and hers was blatant. One afternoon, I caught her attempting to subtly influence a neighbor who had once been close to our family. The neighbor, a retired banker in his 70s with salt and pepper hair and a keen sense for deceit, had been friendly but neutral. Emily's words were honeyed, but I could see through them. Later that evening, I met with him personally, calm but firm, reviewing the facts and presenting proof of her manipulations. By the end of our conversation, he promised to remain neutral and truthful, an ally in the quiet war that was unfolding. As days passed, I carefully created a paper trail for the courts. Each document Emily had attempted to manipulate or misrepresent was countered with notarized statements, historical records, and expert analysis. My living room became a command center, papers stacked high, spreadsheets and ledgers spread across every surface. The more she tried to act, the clearer the evidence became. Every reckless move she made strengthened our case. Emily, in her arrogance, began contacting lawyers to push for quick settlements, hoping to catch us off guard. But I had anticipated this. I had consulted estate lawyers for months, ensuring that every clause of my trust was airtight. I sent preemptive notices, prepared affidavits, and scheduled formal audits. She believed she could outmaneuver me with a rush, but patience and preparation were my weapons. By the end of the first week, I had identified her psychological patterns as clearly as her financial ones. She thrived on intimidation and misdirection, attempting to create panic in Ryan and anyone who opposed her. I countered with calm, controlled responses. My own demeanor became part of the strategy. Every interaction, every phone call, every meeting demonstrated composure and authority, subtly reinforcing her vulnerability while protecting our position. Late one night, I reviewed her emails one more time, silver hair loose around my shoulders, cardigan slightly open. The arrogance in her words was astounding. She believed that by creating false narratives, she could sway the court and friends alike. But each misstep, each attempt at manipulation, was now catalogued in a detailed timeline that I would present when the time was right. Every reckless action she took would become evidence of her greed and deceit. I also began planning a more subtle, personal counterattack. Beyond the legal and financial safeguards, I wanted to ensure she could never rebuild her image or credibility. This meant gathering testimony from those she had tried to manipulate, documenting patterns of behavior, and ensuring that her reputation would crumble along with her plans. Revenge in this case was not only legal, it was strategic, psychological, and inevitable. By the second week, Emily's desperation became more apparent. She sent letters implying that I was hiding assets, attempting to provoke fear and hesitation. I smiled faintly, knowing these moves were exactly what I had anticipated. My counters were ready. Detailed financial records, notarized statements, and witness confirmations left her claims empty and unconvincing. Every bluff she attempted only strengthened our position. Ryan began to regain some confidence. "Mom, I feel like we can actually beat her now," he said one evening, sitting beside me while I reviewed the latest batch of documents. I placed a reassuring hand on his. "We aren't just fighting a divorce. We are teaching someone who thought greed could triumph a lesson she won't forget." As Part 3 progressed, my strategy took on layers: legal, social, psychological, and evidence-based. Emily's arrogance was leading her directly into traps we had constructed carefully over days of observation and preparation. I watched patterns form, predicted each action, and reinforced every defensive position. She was bold, reckless, and overconfident, a perfect combination for her own downfall. Then came the first real breakthrough. Evidence of her secret attempts to divert funds and manipulate advisors surfaced. Emails she thought were private, phone messages she assumed would be deleted, all became irrefutable proof. I compiled it meticulously, preparing for the inevitable confrontation that would leave her exposed. By the end of Part 3, I had a full blueprint. Every lie she told, every manipulation she attempted, and every desperate effort to gain wealth illegally was documented and ready. The legal team, friends, and financial advisors were aligned, and Ryan had regained his resolve. Emily believed she was in control, but in reality, she had been walking into a carefully constructed net from which there would be no escape. I closed my ledger late that night, silver hair loose around my shoulders, cardigan draped over a chair, and whispered to myself, "She thinks she's clever. She hasn't seen what patience, preparation, and decades of experience can do. Every move she makes now only tightens the trap. Soon, she will wish she had never underestimated me." The audience is left anticipating Part 4, where the confrontation escalates, Emily's lies and greed are exposed publicly, and the grandmother finally seizes control, delivering justice both legally and personally. The courtroom smelled faintly of polished wood and stale coffee, sunlight streaming through tall windows, catching on the stacks of documents I had prepared. I adjusted my beige cardigan over a crisp blouse, silver hair tied neatly in a low bun, and breathed slowly, steadying myself. This was the moment everything came to light, the confrontation I had been planning, the exposure of Emily's greed and deceit. She sat across the room, impeccably dressed, makeup flawless, trying to mask the panic I knew was creeping in beneath the surface. Ryan was beside me, still pale, but his eyes reflected a growing sense of hope. "Mom," he whispered, voice tight, "I don't know how you kept so calm all these weeks." I placed a hand on his shoulder, squeezing gently. "Patience, Ryan. She thinks she's in control, but control is an illusion when arrogance blinds you. Today she will see that." The first witness I called was our family accountant, a meticulous man in his late 60s, gray hair combed back, wearing a conservative suit and tie. His testimony was clear, detailed, and unwavering. "All funds in the trust were properly allocated and protected," he stated firmly. "There has been no diversion of assets, no improper access, and all actions have been in accordance with the established legal agreements." Emily's attorney tried to interrupt, but the judge allowed the accountant to finish, and every word landed like a hammer striking steel. Next came the emails and letters Emily had sent, carefully documented, each one time-stamped and annotated. I presented them calmly, pointing out her attempts to manipulate friends, advisors, and even Ryan. The courtroom absorbed every detail. The smugness in her face faltered as she realized that her every step had been tracked and countered. I could see the tension in her shoulders, the subtle trembling of her hands. This was the first crack in her carefully constructed facade. I took a deep breath, silver hair brushing my shoulders, and addressed the court myself. "Your Honor," I began, voice firm but controlled, "this case is not merely about a divorce. It is about greed, manipulation, and betrayal. The documents I have presented demonstrate a deliberate attempt to misrepresent facts, intimidate family members, and unlawfully access funds to which she has no legal claim." The courtroom was silent, the weight of my words settling over everyone present. Emily's attorney tried to interject again, questioning motives, suggesting that I was overreacting. But I was prepared. Each claim she made was countered with factual evidence, testimony, and irrefutable records. I watched Emily's face change, her confidence draining. The smirk that had so infuriated me weeks ago was gone, replaced with panic, frustration, and fear. She had thought this confrontation would intimidate us, but instead, it revealed her arrogance and deceit. Then came the witnesses I had quietly prepared over the past weeks, friends, business associates, and neighbors who had been approached by Emily. Each account painted the same picture: attempts at manipulation, deceitful statements, and calculated efforts to gain access to assets that weren't hers. Every testimony reinforced the narrative I had built. Emily's greed had led her to betray not only my son but our entire family. Ryan, sitting quietly beside me, began to straighten his posture, a quiet fire igniting in his expression. "Mom, you really did everything," he whispered. I smiled faintly, letting him feel the triumph that patience and preparation had built. "We only act when the time is right, Ryan. Revenge is not just about anger, it's about precision, patience, and ensuring justice is seen clearly by all." The judge reviewed the documents and testimonies carefully. Emily shifted in her seat, clearly realizing that her plan had collapsed. The arrogance that had fueled her greed now worked against her. Every attempt she had made to manipulate the situation, to claim entitlement, was now laid bare for everyone to see. The courtroom felt charged, the air thick with anticipation. I remained calm, letting the evidence speak for itself. When my attorney Karen presented the final pieces of evidence, bank records, notarized statements, and the timeline of Emily's attempts to manipulate the family and the trust, her collapse was almost inevitable. The judge's eyes narrowed, scanning each page meticulously. I watched Emily's face pale, the carefully constructed image of confidence and control crumbling under the weight of documented truth. Every whisper of doubt she had sown in the community and within the family now turned back on her, a mirror of her own deception. After hours of testimony, questions, and legal arguments, it was time for the final presentation. I stood, silver hair gleaming under the courtroom lights, beige cardigan slightly open, hands steady over the final stack of documents. "Your Honor, Emily's actions were deliberate, calculated, and driven purely by greed," I said. "This is not just a divorce, it is an exposure of a betrayal so deep that it threatens the well-being of my family. The evidence presented demonstrates conclusively that any claims to the trust are without merit and intended solely to deceive and manipulate." The courtroom remained silent for a moment, the weight of my words hanging heavily in the air. Emily's face betrayed a mixture of shock and panic. She had believed herself untouchable, but the carefully laid trap had closed around her, each step she had taken now contributing to her exposure. The judge nodded slowly, absorbing the totality of evidence, and for the first time, Emily's attorney appeared uncertain, grasping for a defense that no longer existed. Outside the courtroom, the atmosphere was tense. The press had gathered, capturing every moment, yet I remained composed. My silver hair glinted in the sunlight, eyes sharp and unwavering. Every camera lens, every whispered comment, was now a witness to the downfall that Emily had brought upon herself. She had aimed to humiliate my son and claim our family's wealth, but in her greed, she had laid bare her own ruin. Later that evening, I walked Ryan through the quiet halls of our family estate. He was finally able to breathe freely, the tension of the past weeks easing slightly. "Mom, I can't believe it. She really thought she could get away with it," he said, voice tinged with disbelief. I placed a hand on his shoulder, brushing a strand of silver hair from my face. Ryan, never underestimate the power of preparation, patience, and observation. She thought greed would make her clever. It only made her predictable. Emily's downfall was not just legal. News of her manipulations spread quietly but inevitably. Friends, neighbors, and distant family members who had been swayed by her words now saw the truth. Her attempts at intimidation, manipulation, and deceit were laid bare for all to see. Her image, carefully cultivated, collapsed under the weight of documented evidence and witness testimony. That night, as I reviewed the final legal documents and confirmed that the trust was fully protected, I felt a quiet satisfaction. Silver hair loose around my shoulders, cardigan draped neatly, I allowed myself a small smile. Justice had been served, not through rash action or anger, but through strategy, patience, and unwavering resolve. Emily had been exposed publicly, humiliated, and legally defeated, unable to touch the fortune she had so greedily coveted. I reflected on the lessons of the past weeks. Betrayal, no matter how clever, leaves traces. Greed, when unchecked, blinds people to consequences. And experience, vigilance, and patience can transform shock into triumph. I had turned betrayal into opportunity, protecting my family, preserving dignity, and ensuring that justice was seen and felt by everyone involved. As I closed the final folder, the courtroom's drama behind me, I whispered to myself, she thought she could take everything, but in her greed, she revealed her true self. Every step she took led her here, to exposure, failure, and the consequences she never imagined. The audience is left anticipating Part 5, where the aftermath, emotional healing, and final moral reflection are revealed. The story will close with justice served, villains humiliated and defeated, and the elderly woman reflecting on the wisdom gained from this ordeal. The morning after the courtroom drama, sunlight streamed through the tall windows of my study, illuminating stacks of papers and legal folders I had meticulously organized over the past weeks. Silver hair tied neatly in a low bun, beige cardigan over a floral blouse, I allowed myself a quiet moment to breathe. The ordeal was finally over. Emily had been humiliated publicly, her lies exposed, and the trust fund she had tried to seize remained fully protected. Justice had been served, and the relief was palpable. Ryan entered the room, his face still pale but eyes now shining with gratitude and newfound respect. "Mom, I don't even know how to thank you," he said, voice trembling. I smiled faintly, placing a hand over his. "Ryan, this wasn't about thanks. It was about protecting what's rightfully yours, and showing that greed, arrogance, and deceit carry consequences. You've seen it firsthand." His shoulders relaxed, the tension of the past weeks finally lifting. I reviewed the final financial reports, ensuring all assets remained intact and that no further attempts at manipulation could occur. Every document, every notarized statement, and every witness account had been carefully preserved. Emily had attempted to create confusion, but each effort had been meticulously countered. I allowed myself a small, satisfied smile, the weight of stress replaced with quiet triumph. Word had spread quickly among family and close friends. Emily's once confident image had crumbled entirely, her attempts to sway opinion, intimidate relatives, and manipulate the situation had failed spectacularly. She was now isolated, her credibility destroyed, and her financial schemes legally blocked. I had expected her downfall, but the speed and decisiveness with which it occurred still brought a subtle sense of satisfaction. The emotional healing for Ryan was as important as the legal victory. I encouraged him to speak openly about the betrayal he had endured, to release the anger and hurt he had carried silently. He described the shock of realizing his wife had plotted against him, and the humiliation he had felt. I listened patiently, silver hair loose around my shoulders, eyes soft but attentive, offering calm reassurance. "Ryan, acknowledging the pain is the first step to moving forward. You've been brave, and now you can reclaim your life without fear." I also took time to reflect on my own emotions. Betrayal had always stung, but this experience reinforced the value of vigilance, wisdom, and patience. I realized that revenge, when executed thoughtfully and without malice, could restore balance and dignity rather than perpetuate further harm. Emily's downfall was not just a victory for the trust fund, it was a moral lesson, a reminder that actions driven by greed and dishonesty inevitably lead to consequences. In the weeks that followed, I focused on rebuilding a sense of normalcy. I spent quiet afternoons reviewing family records, organizing personal documents, and strengthening the foundations of the trust to prevent any future schemes. Ryan gradually resumed control of his business and personal finances, now with a newfound confidence and appreciation for the careful oversight I had always provided. He moved through daily life with a sense of empowerment that had been missing during Emily's manipulation. The public aspect of Emily's defeat continued to unfold subtly. Friends, neighbors, and distant family members who had been swayed by her words now saw the truth clearly. She had attempted to present herself as a victim, but every effort she made was contradicted by documented evidence. Her reputation, once carefully cultivated, had been irreparably damaged. She had not only failed to acquire wealth but had also lost social standing and credibility, her arrogance and greed leaving her isolated and vulnerable. I reflected on the broader lessons of this ordeal. Trust, once betrayed, can be rebuilt only through transparency, vigilance, and ethical action. Greed blinds people to consequences, but patience, preparation, and moral clarity can counter even the most audacious schemes. The experience reinforced my belief that wisdom gained through decades of life, careful planning, and attention to detail was a shield that protected not only assets but also the emotional well-being of those we care for. One afternoon, Ryan and I walked through the family estate, the late afternoon sunlight casting a warm glow over the gardens. He paused, looking at me with deep respect. "Mom, I've learned so much from watching you. Not just about money, but about strength, patience, and knowing your own worth." I smiled faintly, brushing a strand of silver hair from my face. "Ryan, life will always present challenges and betrayals. What matters is how you respond, with calm, intelligence, and integrity. Revenge can be satisfying, but true victory lies in protecting what is right and preserving dignity." Even Emily's attempts at legal retaliation had ended in failure. Every claim she filed was dismissed or countered, her debt growing as legal fees mounted. She had assumed that divorcing Ryan and targeting the trust fund would grant her financial security, but her greed had only resulted in financial ruin. Her downfall was complete, and the sense of poetic justice was undeniable. I spent quiet evenings reflecting on the personal growth that emerged from this conflict. Betrayal had revealed vulnerabilities, but it had also strengthened resilience, sharpened insight, and reaffirmed the value of ethical vigilance. I understood now more than ever that the most effective defense against betrayal was not anger or impulsive action, but careful observation, strategic planning, and unwavering adherence to truth. Ryan, now more confident and composed, began rebuilding his life with clarity and determination. He expressed gratitude not only for the preservation of the trust fund, but also for the lessons learned in navigating deceit, greed, and betrayal. I felt a quiet pride in seeing him emerge stronger, more perceptive, and more prepared for the challenges that life might bring. As the weeks passed, Emily's presence faded from the family circle. Friends and associates who had once entertained her manipulations now kept their distance, recognizing her lack of integrity. She faced financial consequences, legal setbacks, and social isolation, a stark contrast to the security, dignity, and moral clarity that Ryan and I now enjoyed. The final documents were filed, the trust fully secured, and every legal avenue of manipulation closed. I sat in my study, silver hair loose, cardigan draped over my shoulders, reviewing the last of the paperwork. A sense of closure settled over me. Betrayal had been confronted, greed had been punished, and justice had been restored. I allowed myself a small, satisfied smile, knowing that the lessons of patience, preparation, and strategic action would remain with both me and Ryan forever. I reflected on the moral truth that this ordeal had revealed. Betrayal, no matter how clever, leaves traces. Greed blinds people, and attempts to manipulate and deceive will inevitably be exposed when met with vigilance, preparation, and integrity. Revenge, carefully executed, can restore balance, protect loved ones, and reveal the true character of those who act dishonestly. Finally, I turned to Ryan, silver hair brushing my shoulders, eyes soft but resolute. "Ryan, this experience has taught us both something invaluable. Life will test you, but the truth, patience, and careful planning will always prevail. Never forget that integrity and wisdom are the greatest defenses against betrayal." He nodded, a quiet understanding passing between us, a bond strengthened not just by family, but by shared trials, triumphs, and the lessons learned from confronting deceit. The audience is left with a sense of resolution and empowerment. The elderly woman has preserved her wealth, dignity, and family, while the villains have been exposed, humiliated, and defeated. The story closes with a reflection on life's lessons. Vigilance, patience, and integrity are the keys to navigating betrayal, and wisdom can turn even the deepest wounds into triumph.